You all got it? There you go. So you can be taking that. I just want to say that I am so thankful to be here. This is an hour, about 50 minutes of me. That's a lot to take. But I'm going to make this as interesting and impactful as possible in this limited time. This is intro to implicit bias and understanding implicit bias. We are in a time where it's kind of edgy out there and a little rough. People, when I say implicit bias, they automatically say, I'm not a racist. Well, bias is so much more than racism, guys. And we are not here to call names and to point fingers and to do all of these things. But I want to talk with you all and work with you all just a little bit on the brain and how the brain works and how it categorizes and how it does all these things to keep us safe. Well, how is being sexist and favoring men in jobs keeping us safe? How is having someone who doesn't look like me keeping me safe? You know, where does this come from? And so we just want to start and unraveling some of these things and getting to know ourselves. I want you to take notes, and I want you to have mercy on this woman who is learning the Zoom world when I navigate through a couple of shared screens. It's not that many, just a couple. Just have mercy on me. And I want you, oh, you guys are doing the poll very well. Thank you. I only need, looks like four more people to complete. 93% complete. Let's go. You guys rock. That's wonderful. And I want you all to take some moments. I'm going to have a little pause in here every once in a while where you just breathe. Miss Lisa Don Yoder says that they cannot see the poll. Breathe, 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 breathe.
Again, so I'm not sure why he can't see it. It's definitely still up. So you've got almost 100% participation with that. So.
All right, sounds good. So we're going to, yeah, 96 participation. You guys rock, like I said. I am going to end the poll, Lisa, at 97%. Looks like you can get 100. I'm good if you guys are good.
I say go ahead.
All righty.
Presentation, thank you.
Ending poll, thank you. There you go. And where is my, here we go. So we're going to talk about the basics here. And I want you to write this down. Know thyself and do no harm. That is a statement that I developed coming out of grad school when we were in ethics classes, and we were taught, no, you need to know about you before you can go working with other people. We needed to know what we were biased about, because being in the clinical world, you could make assumptions that you didn't even know you were making, and how difficult that could be in outcomes and how you present and how you work with other people. We were required to go to therapy. Our professor said, how dare you want to put someone on the couch and you haven't been on the couch? We needed to know our limitations, especially being new clinicians, in how something may trigger us or something may cause us to not give a good diagnosis because we're seeing things through our eyes and our perspectives as opposed to the people that we were serving. So know thyself and do no harm. I'm not biased. Well, not saying you're not biased is called bias. It's actually a cognitive bias, and it's the blind spot bias. We all have them. Our brain develops them to help protect us. We categorize and group people every day, all day, as a way of making life easier. And you know that it's about being easy and comfortable, because once we find out we have these biases, and they may be biases that perpetuate some type of ism, then we become uncomfortable. Then we become afraid. Then we become defensive, right? So you know that discovering these things will cause you some form of discomfort. And guys, that's okay. That's how we're gonna make change. That's how we're gonna do things different, right? So these are a few things that we're gonna go through. I am not gonna spend a lot of time with PowerPoint because I want you to listen to me and take notes, okay? It's very important here. What is implicit bias? Implicit bias, also known as implicit social cognition, refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions in an unconscious manner. So when people tell you, well, no, I didn't do that. I didn't know that. They really do mean that. And in this talk, I will be transparent and tell you some things about myself because I think I'm pretty great and I've acted out in some very negative ways that have affected people with negative outcomes. So to say that I'm not this, I'm not that, well, yeah, we probably are, but no, that doesn't make you a bad person. You're not doing this stuff on purpose. You're not intentionally trying to hurt people, but it is happening. Now, I'm not crazy or dumb or stupid or anything else, and neither are you. You know that there really are racist, sexist, ageist, you know, all these ist that people can be. We know that's out there, and we get that. But when you look at people in general, that's a very small portion. What is going on in the United States, in the Western world, is the biases that people have developed based on media, upbringing, how you're raised, history, foundational things in the United States. Those biases are working, and because they do affect a specific people group, be it gender, age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, vanilla ice cream, chocolate ice cream, whatever it is, then because it's perpetuated against a group, it becomes an ism. So is everybody who's, you know, white racist? No. But if there's certain biases being acted out, it could perpetuate a racist situation. So I'm gonna share another screen with you. This is a short video that's gonna give you a little bit of information here about how the brain receives information and how biases actually affect how we're thinking and going. So I'm gonna flip to this next screen. Just give me 5 seconds here. Again, have mercy on the Zoom user here. Please take notes. Please take notes.
New research from the fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias.
Uh-oh, sorry.
New research from the fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs. For more information,
so with this video, you see that, oh, here we go. You see how it's saying the brain, that it will take these images, these things that you've been fed, and wire itself, right? So when people say, well, I'm not like that, I wouldn't feel like that. Well, yeah, you are, because these images, these things have been wired in here, because why? We have a natural tendency to make social categories, to group, to do these things. Now, I'm liking in this video that they say social categories, because the things of the isms are social constructs. Those are things that have been created. Race as a construct was created with Darwin, right? Ageism is something that was just created in 1964, and it was about the discrimination of the elderly. And eventually we started seeing, as generations live longer and longer, the discrimination against the youth. So these things, gender preference, sexual identity, these things are all social constructs. So our brain is just dropping us into these social categories. And then whatever images we've received defines what those categories are, right? So human is really what we should be, and we all have these different shades of color. But because of how we are in Western society and how Western society was established, now it becomes a black, white, Hispanic, brown, Asian. We have all these different social constructs based on race, okay? The association that becomes wired in how we act, note in the video, it's not intentional. Most people in their heart would not go to school just to wait on men. I'm only going to take care of men. But women, it's documented, receive less standard services than men in the medical field. People are not going to medical school, spend $500,000 on a degree, all these hours of work, all of this exhaustive education to say, I'm only going to teach white people. But it is noted that Black people receive 60% less pain medication for the same illnesses than white people. Nobody's doing that on purpose. Why is this happening? What's going on? People don't go to school to teach, spend all this money on an education, working all these hours. We all know teachers work even after hours to say, I'm only going to teach white kids. But in the educational system, Black kids are suspended more, removed from school more, and have higher dropout rates. Something is going on. When we talk about the legal system, I don't know that police officers go to school, go to the academy to say, I'm only going to have police brutality against Black people. The research shows that more white people are killed by police officers, but more Black people experience police brutality, which leads to deaths. I don't think they're going to school to say, or the academy, I'm just going to go be brutal to Black people, but it's happening. 3 major systems in the United States that support who we are. Financial, economic, that's a given. I'm not talking about that system. I'm talking about education, healthcare, and the legal system. And many of you work somehow in those areas or are affiliated or affected in those areas somehow. Those are the 3 systems with the largest disparities in race, gender, and age inequalities. They have less women that work in those systems. They have less women that receive specific care in those systems. They have more minorities that receive less care. So the disparities are there, right? There's huge disparities. How is this happening? Write this down. Affinity, A-F-F-I-N-T-Y, affinity bias. In the video, you heard them mention that we will just take an affinity towards who we are. We will lean towards who we are. The United States was founded by white European men. So when people say, why is it 2020 and we're still being run by white middle-aged men? Well, that's how we were founded. Until we start shaking our brains, learn to retrain what's been wired, we'll keep perpetuating it. It's trainings like this offered by MHAM that will have us as individuals learn just a little bit more and have some more awareness to share with our family and our friends and our coworkers, and so we can start paying attention and then becoming responsive. It's okay to be aware, but then you have to be responsive. So, all the police chiefs are, you know, white middle-aged men. Well, they were the first ones who were police chiefs. Well, why are Black people having this police brutality? Well, eventually it was that Black people were deemed to be more violent and more aggressive. And then when you see these negative images, then your brain thinks that and you react. So it's very, very, very important that we pay attention to what we're seeing and then note in ourselves how we may react. Again, not intentional. Not intentional. I just told the last class I taught, I said, none of you have the power to be racist over me. You can't control me. You can't control my income, my jobs, my this. You could have biases that push me out and eventually racism could happen, but you personally are not going to be racist against me. Okay? So let's keep moving on a little bit here. I want to go back to, and if you have questions, Q&A, you want to put those in there and Lisa's going to take care of that for you. So am I an ist? What's an ist? An ageist, a racist, a sexist, a fattest, all the ist you can think of, right? And, oh, I've got an error, M-I-N, oh yeah, I got it right. So what actually is racism? It's prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism. You're actually bothering people, directed against someone of a different race because you think yours is better. That's what racism is. So me, because I love Black folks and think like, oh, Black folks can survive anything in general. We've been through a lot, and, you know, people got through slavery and did all this and that. I can have that about myself. My Southern roots, I love that, you know, my culture, my traditions, but I don't use that to block out a white person from a job or from obtaining something, you know, that they are qualified for. If I was doing that, then I would be a racist. So if you are white, and we're living in this society right now where my white friends and white folks are saying, oh my gosh, I feel so bad. All this stuff is being brought to light, and these white people did this and that, and oh my gosh, I'm a white man, and so now I gotta make sure I'm looking out for women and minorities and LGBTQ, I gotta do this. Oh God, I'm horrible. Stop. Let's stop that. And this is a part where we breathe deep. Whomever you are, whatever you are, be fine with that. Just make sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that you're not so biased and you don't know it, that you're using that against other people and causing racism. If you're German and you appreciate your German roots and your family and you celebrate and you do all that, do that. Be you. Just make sure that you're not excluding other people if you're in a position of power from things that they have earned. That's when it becomes racist. That's when it becomes racist. Sexism, prejudice or stereotyping or discrimination typically against women on the basis of sex. Now we say typically against women because we know that men are being discriminated against as well in the workforce. There has been an increase in male complaints of sexism at the EEOC. So we know that anyone can be sexist. Because I have an affinity to women, probably because I am one. Does that mean that I treat men bad and I say, you ain't getting no job up in here? Okay, so we want to make sure that we're not using that against another people group. Talking about implicit bias, guys, how we can take on this subject without the anxiety and without the fear of being called a name or being identified as something negative. We want to understand what we're working with here, and that I can address my biases without being these things. Ageism, again, this was something not even started until the 60s. Prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. Originally, it was against seniors. We have so much with generations now that, what are people saying I hear? I'm not hiring no millennials. Those young kids, they don't listen. They get on my nerves. What? You can't do that. What if they're qualified? No, they ain't. Had a person say, as a medical professional, they had been turned away from patients because patients said they were too young. You're too young to be a doctor. I don't want you. Give me an old doctor. What? Ageism. There's so many isms that can make you an ist. The isms that make you an ist. Does it stop? Oh my goodness, Lord help us. Questions. If you want to know if you got this stuff going on, do your actions have the power to change the trajectory of another person's life? And is that person of another race or ethnic group, age group, gender, sexual orientation? Do they like vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? Do you have the power to change that person's life? Are you exerting that power? If so, you might be an ist. You might be. Or is it bias and it's coming out as an ism? Okay? Very important. If you have questions, I want you to put them in the chat. I need you to pay attention. We have these three major systems. I saw someone asked about this: the education system, the healthcare system, and the legal system. This is where we see a perpetuation of huge biases being acted out because of the disparities that are there. So many disparities. There's two videos that we're gonna watch. They're very short, but I want you to see these numbers first. Okay, education. 80% of teachers in the US are white females. Did you see in the first video, if we see teachers as females, that's how we expect teachers to be. So then we just keep going and creating more female teachers. And if teachers were white, then white female teachers, that's what we got, y'all. Until we change it and we say, son, it's okay for you to be a teacher. Until we say, son, it's okay for you to teach elementary school, right? We're going to continue to have these skewed numbers. So if 80% of the teachers in the US are white females, but 70% of teachers in the US report they are fearful of Black boys as young as 12 years old, why do we have these high suspension rates of Black children and high dropout rates of Black children? Well, because 80% of the teachers are white females and 70% say they're fearful of Black boys. It's math. It's simple. But why is it happening? Because every time I turn the TV on, I see a Black man, a dark-skinned person that's done something illegal or something wrong, or, you know, police records or chasing in cars and blah, blah. I see the negative. My brain's been fed that for so long, that's what my brain thinks it is. Black boys are viewed as 4 to 5 years older than their chronological age. So why do these teachers think that a 12-year-old is going to sexually assault them? Because they're really in their head looking at a 16 or 17-year-old. So in education, can you now recognize where this disparity, why it's there and why it keeps going? It's bias. People aren't on purpose just, oh, you're Black, get out. Bias is there and it's perpetuating and to the point where it becomes racist. Healthcare. Black patients receive 60% less pain medication than white patients with same illnesses. Why? Well, historically, Black women are perceived as being able to handle more pain. This goes back to the father of gynecology, who said that Black women could handle more pain. So he took enslaved Black women and he did all of his reproductive surgeries on them without anesthesia. So if this is the mindset, well, then it keeps going. And how often do you hear the hashtag strong Black woman? Oh, they can take it. Black women can do anything. Got the world on their shoulders. So when I'm telling the pain management doctor, no, I can't handle it, I'm hurting, what bias comes up? Black. Oh, female, she can probably take it. I don't want to overprescribe and then I get in trouble. What if she's drug seeking? What, right? Black male, oh, is he on drugs? Is he on heroin? And because the system is set up in healthcare now with every HMO, PPO, can't do this, got to do this. Doctors only spend 7 minutes on average with a client. And if they're low socioeconomics, 4 on average with a client or patient, I don't have time to process a lot of cognitive information to make a good decision. And so affinity bias just takes over. It just happens. It simply happens. And people are like, that's not true. They know what they're doing. They're doing this on purpose. Not really. Think about yourself. Think about the biases that you perpetuate, that you put out there. I don't have any. That's a bias right there. You're not doing it on purpose. Your brain is meant for survival. And in order to survive, your brain does 2 things: predict and protect. It's going to predict something based on what it's been wired to see and view. and then it's going to do something to protect you. So let me give you a visual. White woman walking down the street. Black guy, hoodies, pants sagging, afro, walking this way. White woman crosses the street. Everybody keeps walking, but people around saying that racist woman, she didn't even know him. Why she only crossed the street because he's black? Well, she did. She didn't do it on purpose. She probably didn't even realize it. But her brain caused her to move because what? Survival, safety, protection. Female, male, could have been a gender thing. Didn't have to be a race thing. Could have been a age thing. I'm an older woman. I don't feel like these young punks, what are they going to do? Because I'm biased against young people. I don't like them. I'm just going. It could have been so many things, but the first thing we scream is that racist white woman. We got to stop calling people names, guys. We got to stop calling people names. I work with what they call delinquents. I just call them my challenge babies. I don't care if they're black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Latinx. I walk around all of them because I don't have time for no conversations. I got stuff to do. And I already think you're going to do something because that's what I've been dealing with. Do I have to stop and have a whole conversation with somebody just because my brain's trying to protect me? And what if in that one instance when I don't stop and somebody snatches my purse, then what? So it's okay, guys, to cross the street. That's all I want you to know. But I want you to know why you're crossing the street and process that. Okay? That's where we are. In the legal system, this is in the state of Indiana. I'm in Indiana, guys, so these are the statistics that I'm using. This is per 100,000 people, right? 100,000 people. Incarcerated, the white people would be 542, Hispanic or Latinx would be 781, American Indian or Native Alaskan would be 888, Black or Native Black, African American, whatever you want to say, is 2,814. You're talking about what, over five times more than the white? That's got to be a reason. It's bias. Prison, the school to prison pipeline is real. If I'm up here in the education system with all of the black kids getting kicked out at higher rates, and now they have higher rates in the legal system, and we know that those incarcerated have low academic skills. Well, they weren't learning if they weren't in school, right? Make sense? We got to make sense out of these things. Yes, it looks like racism in these systems because of how the people groups are being affected, but it's coming from this bias and it's perpetuating this racist outcomes. So we got to be mindful of these things. It's very, very important to pay attention to the numbers and to what's going on. I'm going to stop here, ask you to take a deep breath and breathe. Might be getting a little prickly, might feel a little uncomfortable, right? But just breathe, and I'm gonna pull this video up for you.
Marla, do you want any questions?
Yeah, you can get questions right now, sure.
So Jose's asking how many teachers in Indiana are white females? Do you know that?
I don't know the number. They're 80%.
80% of all teachers in Indiana are white. Okay.
That's a state, yeah, that's a state statistic.
Okay. And there was another comment from John saying that maybe instead of implicit bias, it'd be clear if the phrase were unintended bias. And it appears that it's conditioned behavior.
It is conditioned.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else?
Do you know how healthcare affects Hispanics? So you had mentioned the statistics with, I think, healthcare and pain management. And does that apply to all people of color, or is that specific to African Americans?
That was specific to African Americans. I can look up other statistics, but that was specific to African Americans.
Okay, thank you.
Can everyone see in here? I don't think I'm on the share. Hold on. Hold on. I don't think I'm on the share.
We cannot see a video if that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I didn't hit the right button. Here it is. There you go.
For the study of race and ethnicity, our goal is to create a just and inclusive society where all people and communities have the opportunity to succeed. One of the primary barriers to this goal we recognize is the impact of implicit bias, which refers to unconscious attitudes and stereotypes that can influence our decision-making, even if we're not aware of it. In this video, we explore how implicit bias affects crucial decisions that determine what pathways are available to individuals. The purpose is to illustrate that unconscious barriers present on these pathways can ultimately alter one's entire life trajectory. We'll start by looking at education. Studies tell us that teachers form different expectations and perceptions of students' behavior based on race. For example, one study showed that teachers rated the same student behavior, imaginative play, as indicative of positive outcomes for white preschoolers and negative outcomes for black preschoolers. This is important because it demonstrates the implicit use of race as a lens to evaluate students' behavior. Similarly, another research study focusing on school discipline showed teachers were more likely to implicitly view negative behavior as a persistent pattern for black students, while teachers were more likely to believe negative behaviors were an isolated incident when the student was white. Added together, these instances of the operation of implicit bias can create a staggering amount of adversity for students of color. Yet, these instances of biased expectations are just the tip of the iceberg. We also know that a history of racial disparity in education is evident in research on academic preparedness, disability diagnosis, and discipline outcomes, all of which can derail students' trajectories toward high school graduation and eventually higher education. Like other multi-stage processes, gaining access to higher education has many decision points during which implicit bias may influence outcomes. For example, one study examined how likely professors were to reply to an email from a potential graduate school applicant to discuss the program. The emails sent to various institutions were identical except information identifying the race and gender of the applicant. The study showed that regardless of the type of program, white males were the most likely to get a response to the email. The race or the gender of the advisor had no impact on these outcomes. What this study illustrates are important points of implicit discrimination in the higher education process that can go unnoticed. These informal communications aren't tracked or evaluated by the university. Thus, because implicit bias is unconscious, professors likely don't know when they exhibit implicit favoritism. It's not that they're malintentioned, but the effects for the applicants are nevertheless meaningful and can affect their academic trajectory. Now, consider the culmination of these differences at different decision points within the pathway to opportunity. By now, many students of color who have experienced implicit or overt discrimination at these junctions may have opted out of pursuing higher education altogether. But for those that remain, familiar barriers exist. These include lower expectations, stereotype threat, and lack of social support, to name a few. For those individuals who overcome the implicit biases they face during their academic careers, there are still hurdles to overcome when entering the workforce. A primary example is the effect of implicit bias on hiring managers' perceptions of resume quality and candidates' competency. We know through several experiments that individuals are more likely to evaluate work materials as higher quality when coming from a white male. In fact, one study even demonstrated that evaluators detected fewer errors when proofreading a writing sample from a white author versus an identical writing sample perceived to be written by a black author. Not only does implicit bias create barriers for many individuals to enter the workforce, but it can also affect internal workplace dynamics. For example, implicit biases affect people's perceptions of leadership skills and reveal the tendency to implicitly associate men with careers and women with staying at home. This is one example from a growing body of research that demonstrates how individuals' perceptions regarding the workforce and economy are impacted by implicit bias. Consider the impact of all of these barriers at once. This compounding effect certainly creates a very different picture of the American dream than what most of us hold to be true. Instead, it paints a reality where significant barriers exist for some groups, while significant advantages exist for others, all of which may be the result of unconscious dynamics. By looking at the lifelong impact of implicit bias at these gateways, we can understand why the notion of picking oneself up by their bootstraps just doesn't hold after facing so many instances of unconscious discrimination. Instead, we need a comprehensive view of structural equity that is also informed by our understanding of implicit bias. Human decision-making and structures of discrimination are two sides of the same coin. Both must be considered simultaneously to break down these barriers to equity in order to ensure all those living in our country can have a fulfilling, opportunity-filled life. At the Kirwan
Okay, so we have this video showing this history, this lifespan of how starting in education, a person of color may be said to have different levels of expectation. You know, well, that maybe they can't do it. I taught a class of school teachers, and a Latinx teacher said that she was placed in what is it called? English as a second language, ESL class, when she was in high school. They just looked at her and put her there, and she didn't even speak Spanish. She said, I've never spoken Spanish. They just put me in there. And so it's those things that we make assumptions of people that cause us, these people, to have this lifelong pattern of struggle. And it says the combination of all of those things going on at one time, now maybe I won't go to higher education or to trade school or somewhere where I can advance my skills. Maybe I'll just continue to work, and then, you know, that's going to be a lower paying job. I might have to work 2 or 3 of those jobs, and, you know, it just goes on and on. But people will say things like, well, if, you know, Marla can do it, you can do it. Well, Marla might have had different advantages and is an exception, and we're talking about, you know, minorities being about 50 million when you include all ethnic groups in the United States. So you can't base me or your one black friend or the one woman that you know in position on a whole mass of people. We want to be thoughtful and mindful when people are telling their story, that we don't get into our own bias and the fear of being wrong. That, you know, I don't believe that. They could do better. They're making excuses. It says in here, we talked about these healthcare disparities. Well, this last video is showing that, oh, these people of color are having these problems and it's lasting a lifetime. Well, then we'll hear a statistic that says there's a racial disparity in healthcare. Black men are dying 7 times faster than white men. And someone will say, well, they eat bad. The black men eat bad. Or is it that they have hypertension and high blood pressure because of all of these barriers that they've been jumping through for years and years and years and years? Well, your heart can only take so much. A disparity in healthcare with Black women. They die from heart disease as a higher rate than white women. Is it because they eat bad? Because that tends to be what people say, you know. Or because of stress through the biases that have been perpetuated from school aged on. The hurdles, they call it, jumping over these hurdles. Women saying, you know, I'm just tired, I don't want to, you know, do this anymore. And women having a higher suicide rate than men, higher completion of suicide than men. Women reporting depression at higher rates than men. Is it because of the constant battles that they're going through when it comes to economics and career biases and gender biases and all these things that are going on. Our mental health is so important, and it's so related, a relationship between the biases that we experience and our mental health. Anxiety, depression, suicide attempts, suicide completions. We have to be considerate of these things and these biases when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about health in general. The World Health Organization has coined that there is no health without mental health. So we have to have good health, which is wholeness of both mind and body with the absence of disease. So bringing this implicit bias into the mental health conversation, how are these biases affecting us? How depressed is a child who's trying to learn and you put them in an ESL class and they don't even speak Spanish, right? How sad for a child, the anxiety that they have to feel because they may be in a wheelchair and people aren't accepting of that in a school where there's not, you know, people who are in wheelchairs. Can they not be the leader of the debate team because they're in a wheelchair? Did they get overlooked because we think they're disabled? Unconsciously, we're not considering them. So many things about implicit bias. I want, we're at 12:50, so my last thing here is how we can counter this, how we can look and say, okay, where can I make a change? How can I retrain my brain? There's a term, it's called counter stereotyping. We all know stereotypes. So when we see a stereotype and someone maybe be coming into our practice and they want to help us, or they need our help if we're in healthcare, or we're educators, something in the legal system, and we take the time, we need time. And that's one thing that society has removed from us, is our ability to spend time. When we have time to sit down and say, what if this person really isn't whatever the stereotype is? When we develop empathy, when we say, what would it feel like to be in that person's shoes? There was an experiment done with a leadership professor, and they were talking about racism, and he was in a room of all Caucasian people, all white folks, and he said, you all who are saying that race doesn't matter, that color doesn't matter, everyone close their eyes, and everyone closed their eyes, and he said, and no one open your eyes, only I'm looking. If it doesn't matter, when you open your eyes, you will be Black and you will have the Black experience, because it doesn't matter. And he said, raise your hands if that's okay with you. And I'm gonna count to 10 and you put your hands down. He counted to 10. He said, okay, everyone open their eyes. When he opened their eyes, he said, none of you raised your hand. It doesn't matter, so why wouldn't you raise your hand? And there became an uncomfortable silence, and some people actually left the class, and that, because we know these things matter. If you're a man and it doesn't matter about career and the women making the same amount of money, then wake up and be a woman and take that. See, we got to start having empathy, not just sympathy. Sympathy says, oh, I feel so sorry for them. That's so sad that happened to them. Or, oh my goodness, what did they do? Empathy says, ooh, what if that was my son? Empathy says, what if my daughter didn't get that job just because she's a daughter? So we want to have empathy. There's a word, individuation. We want to treat people as individuals as opposed to putting them into these categories. Dr. Caroline Leaf, L-E-A-F, Dr. Caroline Leaf is a neuroscientist. She has this word called uncategorization. She said the moment that we start to uncategorize and group people is the moment that we heal our brains. We start to heal our brains, because the isms and these social constructs that we've been raised with, they actually have caused harm to our brains, therefore to our mental and emotional health. So it's very important, you all, that we live to know thyself and do no harm. Know thyself and do no harm. I recommend that you all take all of the implicit bias assessments through the Harvard Institute. They're free. Don't try to trick it. Just take it. Don't say, that's not true. Oh my God, it's tricking me. It's doing what it's supposed to do. You want clear, accurate results. And then I want you to reflect on that and say, wow, how have I displayed these biases? Where have I displayed these biases? When? Because now that you're aware, you're going to start paying attention. The people that I have in classes, this is a whole system of classes that I teach. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know that before. I had to check myself. Oh, I told my neighbor, that's not right. Oh, see, this is how it's going to change. The systems are going to change when we start changing as individuals, changing our households, changing our streets, our blocks, our communities, our cities, our states. This is how it's going to change. I thank you for your time. I know we're approaching the 1 o'clock hour, and there is a post poll that Lisa is going to, I'm going to launch it. Lisa, are you going to do our closing remarks or any questions? We're at 12:55.
So there are some questions, and maybe while people are doing the post poll, I can ask you
Okay.
to answer them. Are you able to launch the post test? Do you want me to?
Let me see where the polls are.
Are
they the same questions, Lisa?
Yes, there was a pre-test and a post-test.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a question. So one question was about how can we act when we notice someone having bias on us? That was from Angelica.
So Angelica, I would say based on your personality, you want to approach that in as kind as a way as possible. Kind is the word I want to use. Some people's personality can be very aggressive and direct, and you don't want to cause offense to people if you can help it, because they're going to learn better when they're a little calmer. But just letting them know, hey, I want you to recognize that when you said that to me, this happened, or I perceived it to be this way, and help me understand, did you mean that? Usually they're going to say, oh, I didn't know, I'm sorry. And they'll kind of get frustrated and no. I don't want you to get upset. I just want you to recognize that you did this. And so if you did it to me, you might do it to someone else. And it could be a form of bias. You just got to be kind, put it out there. I was in a situation where I had to tell someone, I said, hey, you know, I noticed that you didn't ask me the same questions you asked everyone around me. And they said, oh, I didn't see you. I said, oh, okay, well, I'm here. I said, did you notice you didn't see me? And I'm the only Black woman in this group. No, I didn't. And I gave him a history lesson. And the lady was very frazzled. She was clearly upset. And she apologized. She said, I didn't know that. I'm sorry. That's all you can do.
Thank you. There's another question from Paul asking about the Harvard Institute assessments. And if I'm correct, that's with the resources that we're going to distribute. Did you put that on the list? Okay, great. So
I'm pretty sure it is. I will send it to you, Lisa, just in case it's not, but I'm pretty sure it is.
There also was a request for the link to the first video that you showed. So if that's not on the list, I'd like to add that before I send that out.
Okay.
There's one other statement about systemic racism and, an observation about how the GI Bill originally excluded people of color. And so that this idea of older white people complaining that people of color should pull themselves up by the bootstraps, the reality is that people of color were not offered the boots, for example, education and loans after the war. So certainly systemic racism is, a whole other area that we could spend time.
It's a whole nother topic, and I'll just throw this out there is I'm getting conversation like this. Why are we doing this in 2020? Why is this still going on in 2020? Well, Jim Crow was from 1877 to 1964. So people living under Jim Crow laws were people who were still just coming out of owning slaves or being enslaved. And now you want me to say separate but equal. Well, I don't want to do that. I want these people to work for me and do what I say. And you guys, people, the silent generation is still alive. We still have people who are living to be 100 years old. They were here when that was the way. That is who they are, right? And so if I'm a white male and I believe with all my heart that these Black people are not the same as me, or that these women don't have the rights as me, and I'm still alive, I'm gonna perpetuate that. And guess what? I taught my kids that. And those kids are some boomers. And guess what? They taught some of me, Generation Z's, that. So we have a whole generational thing going on. People are saying, why is it still happening? Well, because the people who perpetuated it are still alive and still teaching it. And the school books are still old as dirt and going on with it, you know? So that's why we got our younger people who are out here fighting the fight. God bless the millennials and the Z's. I'm an Xer, I'm sorry.
All right, Marla, thank you so much for your presentation today. There's a lot to digest and a lot to, you know, really kind of think about from it. And I appreciate your time today.
I appreciate being here. Thank you. The poll, if you all could go, it's almost done. 63 out of 69. So go ahead, complete those.
Great. So what's going to happen is after we sign off here, I will send out the evaluation link, and we really would like as many people as possible to complete the evaluation for today. We appreciate your participation and anything that you, any ideas that you have for future webinars. And we actually have a little incentive, a $25 gift card for people who complete the evaluation by the end of today. So, and then a little bit later today, we'll send out the certificate of completion, as well as a list of resources with some of the things that we've talked about today. So if you're interested, and actually I'm going to include people who've participated today on announcements about future webinars that we're having. We've got our next webinar is in 2 weeks, and that'll be two folks from the Michiana community, Kelly Brienne and Sally Dixon, talking about mental health and the connection to maternal and fetal outcomes. And then we have a wonderful symposium that we have put together for October 2nd, which will talk about maternal mental health. And we have a speaker from Los Angeles, Dr. Saida Pepra, who will be talking about racism and the impact on African-American women's health and mental health outcomes. So you'll get information on all of our fall offerings, and we welcome your participation. And thank you so much for coming today. Marla, there's lots of people sending thank yous in the in our chats. So.
I'm trying to answer some of them. I thank you all for attending and your participation. I really appreciate it. And thank you for completing the poll. It's 100%. There you go.
Okay, excellent. Okay. All right, Marla, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and then just everybody just look for a follow-up email from me shortly. Thank you.